World of Warcraft Classic is coming in 2 weeks. I've put together a series of videos that contain 20 tips for players who have never raided in World of Warcraft. These are based on my experiences raiding in vanilla 15 years ago and playing in the Classic beta this summer. I'm assuming you've at least read the Classic primer released by Blizzard. If not, you can find it at this link. The tips in this guide are ordered chronologically to line up with your play experience. Tip number 1, know what you're getting into. Before you even start playing Classic, you should know this. In order to raid, you're going to have to commit to scheduled playtimes. Your time spent playing Classic is going to break down into 3 phases. Your first phase is leveling. This phase is largely questing and exploration. It's a mostly solitary experience. Anyone can do this and it's a lot of fun. As you near the max level of 60, you're going to transition into the second phase, 5-man dungeons. You'll be able to group with random people on your realm, and so again, anyone can do this and it's a lot of fun. Eventually, running those same 5-man dungeons will get old. At this point, you will transition into the third and final phase, raiding. In order to raid, you're going to need to be able to commit to a scheduled playtime where you and 39 other players enter large dungeons and kill large bosses. For example, this guild is going to raid Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. For a lot of people, it feels really weird to schedule time to play video games. Video games are traditionally something we do in our unscheduled downtime, but World of Warcraft Classic is a completely different paradigm. The tips in this video are aimed at players who want to make the transition into raiding, but no amount of advice will help you if you can't commit to scheduled raid times. Tip number 2, pick the right realm. The first decision you make is what realm to play on. It is one of the most important decisions you will make. In fact, when I first laid out my 20 tips for new raiders, 6 of them were about how to pick the perfect realm. And then Blizzard released the realm list and there are 11 realms. So with so few realms to choose from, you're not going to find a perfect realm, but you should still be able to find a good realm. And here are the most important factors you should consider when looking for one. First, you should play on a realm that is heavily populated. Classic World of Warcraft does not work as a game if you aren't on a heavily populated realm. The bigger the better. Second, you should play on a realm whose time zone matches your available raiding times, not your geographical location. Raids typically start between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. realm time and last for around 3 hours. For most players living in that time zone, that schedule works fairly well, so most players will be correct in picking a realm that matches their time zone. However, if you live on the East Coast but don't get off work until 10 p.m., you're going to have many more options for raiding if you play on a West Coast realm. And if you live on the West Coast but need to wake up at 4 a.m. for work every day, you may appreciate the relatively early start times of an East Coast realm. Third, strongly consider playing on a PvP realm instead of a normal realm. You may find yourself in a position where you want to transfer your character in the future, and if Blizzard is following the same rules that were in place 15 years ago, you will not be allowed to transfer from a normal realm to a PvP realm. Rolling on a PvP realm keeps your options open. Finally, decide if you want to play on a realm that has a large population of streamers. I'm not going to get into it here, but you can search YouTube and find people with various opinions on the effects large streamers are going to have on the game. You can use avoidstreamers.com to see which realms they're playing on. Tip number 3, pick a class based on which spec is viable for raiding. While on the surface, Classic has many hybrid classes, the reality is that almost all classes only have one viable raiding spec. Specifically, Druids, Paladins, Shaman, and Priest are almost exclusively healers in raids. Don't roll a Paladin thinking you're going to be swinging a big hammer. There are a lot of people on YouTube telling you to play Classic how you want. This is terrible advice for a new raider. Some players may be able to make an inefficient off-spec work, but you probably aren't going to be one of them. It is an uphill battle and breaking into raiding as a newbie is going to be hard enough. Don't make life harder for yourself by trying to swim upstream. Pick a class whose most likely role in raiding is something that you're going to enjoy. Tip number 4, do not roll a warrior. Leveling a warrior on Classic is playing the game on hard mode. It probably isn't a good pick for a first-time raider. Warriors have a legendary status in vanilla World of Warcraft. They were the only real main tanks, and they also did amazing damage. And because they were so hard to level, there were never enough of them. But warriors were not underrepresented on the beta, and they likely won't be underrepresented on Classic. You will face stiff competition as a main tank and possibly significant competition for any raid spot. You may be required to collect 2 different sets of gear when most other classes only need 1, and the consumable farming requirements for tanks are significant. Long story short, make sure you know what you're getting into before rolling a warrior. Tip number 5, don't sweat your race unless you're a priest. YouTube is full of videos breaking down the racial bonuses of each race and telling you which race is best for each class, but the fact is the racial bonuses are largely irrelevant unless you're a priest. Priests get race-specific spells in addition to the normal racial abilities. If you're rolling an alliance priest, you should roll a dwarf. Dwarf priests get a spell called Fear Ward that no other priests get. It is very relevant to in-game rating and remains so well into the Burning Crusade. You can technically live without it, but it is miles ahead of any other bonus the other races get. And with those 5 tips, you're now ready to start actually playing the game. So let's talk about some tips for leveling. Again, these are specific to people who are aiming to raid once they hit level 60. If you want more generalized tips, you can find those all over YouTube. Tip number 6, consider using some assistance while leveling. I talked to a few people during the beta who were planning on leveling in Classic using no guides or websites in an attempt to capture the original vanilla experience. The problem is that's not really a thing. We had database sites back in the day. When I was leveling, it wasn't uncommon for me to look up all the quests in my current zone to make sure I wasn't missing anything before moving on. And the thing is, while the leveling experience in vanilla is vastly more fun than retail, it's still a 15-year-old game. We've learned a lot in 15 years. This is not Breath of the Wild. Classic is not a game that is going to reward you for exploring, so I strongly recommend using some kind of guide while leveling. You have a few options. You can try going it alone and then referencing the database websites like wowhead.com when you get stuck. If you want a little more guidance in-game, there are add-ons that show quests on your world map. And finally, you can just use a step-by-step leveling guide. Joanna's guide is the gold standard and you can find a link in the description. Tip number 7, do not skip your professions. At a minimum, you should be advancing your first aid while leveling. It is a huge help even for classes that have a healing ability. Furthermore, any decent raid is going to expect all its members to have first aid maxed out. Maxing first aid is very easy, and if you don't have it maxed, it is a strong signal that you aren't serious about raiding. Beyond first aid, I would recommend working on all your professions as you level. You'll need the money, and you'll have plenty of other things to do at 60. Tip number 8, do not be afraid to grind. Unlike retail, in Classic there is not a significant disparity between the experience you gain from quest and the experience you gain from grinding. If you find the game getting difficult, or you simply find yourself in a spot where the mobs are around your level but are dying very easily, consider just grinding out a level or two. It will put you ahead of the curve and make the next 10 levels a lot easier. Tip number 9, be stingy with your gold. Gold is hard to come by, and your mount and epic mount are expensive. Do not buy abilities you don't need, and do not go crazy at the auction house. A large source of gold while you're leveling is vendor trash. These are great items that have no use in the game and can always be sold to vendors. Never forget to empty your bags of vendor trash while in town. Vendor trash nets you a lot of gold, and if your bags are full out in the field, it means you're not taking the trash back to sell. You should always be on the lookout for ways to increase your bag space. Any upgrade in bag space will pay for itself in very little time. Tip number 10. Invest time in your add-ons as you level. You aren't going to raid in Classic without investing some time in your add-ons. Start doing small things while leveling to get comfortable. Things I would recommend you address with add-ons very soon after you roll a new character. Showing the vendor price of items, auto-repairing at NPCs, auto-sell vendor trash at NPCs, seeing the coordinates of your location in the world, improved quest log and quest tracking, and a way to monitor when your self-buffs fall off. You can find links for the add-ons I used in the beta in the description of this video. Tip number 11. Do dungeons while you level. If you've never played World of Warcraft or you're coming back from a long hiatus, leveling dungeons are the perfect place to cut your teeth. Leveling dungeons are not hard, but they will test your knowledge of your character more than the monotonous solo leveling. The gear you get will help you level, especially starting with Scarlet Monastery, which I highly recommend, especially if you're Horde, as it's easy to get to. Remember, there are no level 60 heroic versions of the leveling dungeons in Classic, so if you don't run low-level dungeons while leveling, you may never experience the content. That is it for this video. These tips should get you to 60, and in the next video I'll share the last 9 tips which will cover what to do when you hit 60 and how to transition into raiding.